And you'll have to go back to Zoom and do record onto this computer.
Which isn't how law works, right? Like, it's like,
The other problem is I can't
you
look
know,
out.
if we kept losing every juncture, but this is our first loss, right?
Well,
Just goes from Zoom direct to YouTube.
Mhm.
live streaming right now.
You probably have for some of the public meetings.
So are we gonna do this with two?
No.
Have to mute, you have to go to YouTube and mute it.
Not this?
No.
So one of the windows will be you.
Like it's
Our personal hell.
Oh, like 30 seconds.
So, we don't have that requirement because we're not making any decisions, but
Since it's being recorded as well, they can go back and look at it.
I did probably send it out as recorded to everybody as they needed.
So to have you welcome
We gotta get
opening ceremony.
Really?
Slide deck.
Do we have an agenda?
You were sending, Kim.
For the cover. Yes. Here you go.
Yeah, I sent you the link. So you did.
Yep.
I didn't know, am I carrying this? Sure. Oh,
Do you want a green
are we
copy?
doing pledge of allegiance and everything? Ellen?
I don't, are you trying to bring in anyone? You can't bring in anyone.
Put on the flag now.
I'm gonna make the executive decision to forego the. But I can start it whenever we're ready.
What's next?
Gosh.
Technology.
Okay, are we recording and stuff?
We are.
Okay, then I'll just start. Welcome to the April 24th, 2025 Planning Commission City Council Public Workshop. We will excuse everyone but me and Kenny in terms of Planning Commission and City Council, and we will forego the opening ceremony in the absence of a flag and people. So we can start with general business and introductory presentation and workshop instructions. Then I think that's you, right?
It is. We're still getting that pulled up, so
Okay.
bear with us a second. The purpose of tonight is we're gonna run through, and I'm glad it's being recorded, a discussion of what is form-based code and what that means for the community. So if anybody asks, we did hold the meeting,
Mhm.
there's record of proof. And there are materials here. We're gonna ask some feedback. We might hold off on the feedback portion. Since there's not people here, we might do the educational and do a feedback at a later date.
Okay. That sounds good.
There you go.
Since there's not a lot of us, I'm just gonna stay here, seated. Skip. And you signed your life away. Congratulations.
There we
There you go. Very
go. The big ones.
Okay. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about form-based code tonight. So the purpose is, as the city center moves forward, it's really about how do you dictate or define what the area is going to look like. And the way that's done is through having a form-based code that regulates things like where windows are, how things are placed, where buildings face, how they're measured, how big they mass, all those types of things. It's a little different than your standard Euclidean land use based zoning. We care less about the use of the building and more about how the building itself works. So what we're going to do is, what is form-based code? We'll look at best practices, successful case studies, what regulates it, core processes, and how it interacts with your zoning. So starting off, this is what is proposed to be the form-based code area. So in the city center master plan boundary, we did pull it back to the canal there, the irrigation canal. So it is not going on the other side.
Okay.
We're going to talk about them later on, but there's going to be likely 2 or 3 districts. A district is a different area or a different character area in the form-based code. So it allows different things or different heights, different looks, different feels. For you guys, they're more about transition. So we want to have a transition that transitions to residential on the east and transitions to commercial on the west. They are different because, well, I think if we said we're going to allow 4-story buildings up along the canal, you'd have a lot of people here tonight. What is form-based code? Is it this one?
This is me. So as Ben alluded to just a minute ago, traditional Euclidean zoning focuses on use first, use and density first, followed by management, followed by the form. That's kind of like the last factor. Form-based code flips it, prioritizes form, puts use last. And then we don't care about use, but in a city center where we're prioritizing mixed use and walkability and an environment where the street interacts with the building in a good perspective, form comes over function. And so that's what we're doing through this. Next slide. So since we are prioritizing form in the city center, it's facilitating a mixed use area where a variety of uses can coexist, so long as they're not nuisances. And that's something that we control through the form-based code. There are still provisions on what is and what is not allowed. But again, prioritizing, making sure that it's to scale for the city center.
So I can hear it now. Yes, you can exclude things like vape shops and tattoo parlors, and you can even limit how many there are in certain areas. So you can't, if you don't want to say none, you could say 1. So you're not sitting here and saying that it's open, you can do whatever you want. You are restricting still.
So this graphic on the bottom here is a pretty good demonstration of how form-based zoning differs from use-based. So with use-based, it's pretty strict, pretty general on what the form looks like, but more so strict on the use. And so the ultimate form is pretty variable and less predictable. And so by implementing form-based code, you can really create a predictable outcome of what the character of an area will look like, and foster that mixed use area within, controlling for the nuisances, but really creating predictable built environment outcomes.
The one thing I will add though is you'll notice that when you have conventional zoning, it's about how big a building can be on the spot or on your parcel. Floor area coverage, floor area ratios, setbacks. With form-based code, you'll see the other side where it's about how can you mix things up and have things be a little bit different so they look more appropriately scaled for whatever the site is. So when we talk about why form-based code is a best practice for downtowns, it's because it is form over function. So when we talk about form, sometimes you get lost in Euclidean zoning with what is the use of that building, not does it fit in the area. And that's how you end up with things like strip malls and big box stores. Not that we ever really wanted them, but that's what fits that style of zoning. So that was function. Now you're looking at form over it. So the goal is to have the right form and then make the uses fit into said form. So you'll see where it promotes a cohesive and functional commercial area. It does provide fairly open blank slates. And it, most importantly, it kind of keeps out the chain looking stuff. So you're not going to get a standard McDonald's You're not gonna get a standard Wendy's or a Swig that's its own little 500 square foot standalone structure. They're gonna have to be part of the bigger building. Not that they won't go there, but they're gonna have to meld to the design and feel of the area. It allows for flexibility. Believe it or not, traditionally and historically, this is how planning was done. You built a building and found uses to go in it. You didn't say, I want to have this type of land use, let me find where I can put it. Typically, you built a big shell and you put in whatever worked for the area. And that's kind of what form-based code is all about. It gives property owners more flexibility, gives them redevelopment options, gives them opportunities to be better stewards of the land, but also to have a more attractive investment. A lot of developers will argue up and down that they don't make as much money on mixed use, but if you talk to the ones that do mixed use well, they make way more money than the ones that do big box stores. The only ones that seem to make a killing that do single land use are the tilt ups, like your industrial, your warehouse ones. Those developers make an arm and a leg. And we all wish we could be them. So the purpose of form-based code is it kind of coordinates your physical forms with your community's vision and goal. So the reason that form-based code was really brought back is instead of saying, we want ultra strict design guidelines that to the nth degree pick paint colors and metal flashings and all this other stuff, we have a vision and we are a little more flexible, but you have to meet the vision of the corridor or the area, whatever the defined boundary is. The purpose is it replaces the effort of a case-by-case negotiation on what a building looks like and provides more transparent rules that developers have to follow. And I left that in bold on purpose because that's a very important statement. You're opening up a lot of man hours and time for your staff because there's very clearly defined standards you must follow. It's not even really up for debate. As long as they meet those standards, they're okay. So instead of having somebody go through with a fine-tooth comb, you have a little more flexibility, and so do developers. If they're going to give a little, the city has to give a little as well. As far as the efforts, what the public covers, so what the city itself would cover. You're in charge of the streetscape standards for what the streetscape look like, open space, public facilities, things of those natures. How things are connected, how they circulate, your alternative transportation, your sidewalks, your bicycle areas, whatever you want to call it. Anything that's really outside of building face falls to the public realm. For private, that's really about buildings and placemaking standards on the buildings themselves. It is not about what the buildings are. You're not here to regulate every nth degree. You're here to sit there and say, do you meet the standards? And you are in charge of this smaller plot of area. Is this one you or me?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
So recently we worked in downtown Murray. There was a lot of concern about the form of the downtown development that would come to some undeveloped parcels. So we worked with the city on creating a vision for the plan for the area. And once we had that vision, it was general language, wasn't codified. They again worked with us and another firm to help codify that vision and to ensure that any development that did come into the area would fit that vision and work accordingly to make sure that it was market feasible, but also compatible with the community character, what the city wanted, what the public wanted. And so we worked with them on creating a form-based code district. You can see the map of that in the bottom left there. And so out of that came a pretty successful form-based code. And now they're seeing development as a result. This is a case where we worked with them start to finish on creating the vision and codifying that vision and helping them lead to development, which is a similar goal here.
Yeah. Similarly to what you guys had, the vision was set with what the downtown will look like as far as materials and forming and massing. And then this code set it up as far as giving things as far as transparencies and materials as far as long life or certain genres and types. So what a form-based code regulates is, and this is kind of the bulk of it, it allows for it really regulates your building type. So there's typically five types of buildings. And for you guys, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But what you're really worried about is how those facades interact with the public space, how they're masked, and what is allowed in the district. So having multiple districts will allow you to have different masses and styles of these buildings. There is not going to be one that says, do whatever you want. It's good. There are going to be parameters to this effort. If you can define the building typologies, you can have a more consistent and context-sensitive design for the area. So instead of saying, I need to review your permits and your everything, and then the next one do the exact same thing. If it's done well, they can take that same information and roll project to project to project. Additionally, it allows for a diversity of intensity. So current land use zoning does not really allow you to say, hey, we want to allow a couple of ADUs. This allows for a little more density in certain areas, and that's the purpose of the city center in North Logan is you don't have a lot of area left to build large. You don't have a lot of area left to build multifamily housing. I know if you build multifamily housing in the neighborhoods, they're going to yell at you. So having it all here kind of helps with that. And having the form-based code and different building types allowed on the same site in the same area will allow for flexibility. Entrances and facades, or entrances and roof styles, the hope is that you would have entrances that are predictable, is the best way to say it. You don't want uniform. You don't want it to look fake. You want it to have nice articulations of the facades, but you also need to have them be predictable as to where they're going to be. When you have roof options, it also allows for a variety of architectural styles, even within the same building. Somebody could have a gabled or a pitched roof on a portion, flat roof on another, slanted on another. So it looks like different buildings, but they're not different buildings. When you have this type of architectural feature that's unified through an area, it does enhance the character and sets the definition of what the place is. It allows for diverse use options. Again, form-based code is about creating the building and then allowing the uses to match and fit in. It is not about telling them what they can and can't do in their building. So what you allow it to do is have multiple subcategories and multiple tenants in one structure and have it be a more flexible process than them having to go through land use or zoning amendments for mixed use or whatever it may be. I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing all the process about those. Typically, you have things like general use, lodging, residential, institutional, retail, commercial, things that are fairly open. But if you need to be more specific, you can be. The broad is typically a little better. It helps people kind of fit into that category. But if you really want to exclude certain things, this is kind of the time and place that you do it. Permitting use by building type. So when we talk about building types, where you're permitting the use not by land, but by the size and use of the building. So if you have an itty bitty little building, you don't want to put your outpatient center in. If you have a big building, you want to put your outpatient center in. I know it sounds kind of common sense, but you'd be amazed how often that doesn't happen that way. It encourages a nice mixed use district, and it does encourage vertical mixture as opposed to just horizontal mixture of space. So instead of just saying we're horizontally mixed because we allow two things on the same site, you're actually going vertical as opposed to horizontal, which for this site is specifically important.
Sorry, so vertical uses, you'd have different vertical uses, which I've heard before.
So retail first
Horizontal.
floor, office second floor, residential 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, how does that distinguish from horizontal? Like, what would horizontal mix?
Horizontal would be if this was the site, you allow this portion to be commercial and this portion to
Oh,
be
got it.
residential.
Okay, just within that.
So more like
area.
what you see on Wolfpack.
Oh,
Town halls be the name, that's true.
Got
it.
oh, okay.
And an important note about the second bullet here is that some building types allow different uses than ground floor and upper floors. So like on the eastern side, especially where there's lower density, the building types that are allowed over there wouldn't allow for upper floor uses because those are the transition zones where we have just residential versus when we get into the heart of the city center and we have I forget the name of the building type, but the more dense buildings, those are the ones that would allow the vertical mixed use with ground floor retail, restaurant, and then upper floor housing or office.
And if you guys would be okay with it, we can structure it in a way that the transitional zones do allow vertical integration in 3-story buildings. But it really wouldn't be 3 or 4 uses in a building. It would be office or commercial and office or commercial and apartment.
Mhm,
Take your pick. It just wouldn't be as diverse.
mhm.
'Cause, I mean, you just don't have as much real estate to play with.
A little bit more predictable.
It helps predict building siting. When we talk about building siting, it is about where the building goes on the lot. So what form-based code does better than Euclidean zoning is it makes you basically put the building up front, as opposed to parking lot up front and building up front. That's the easiest way to describe this. I know that some people are gonna say, well, what about parking? You just gotta walk around the back of the building. Or better yet, you could tell us to write in there that there's gotta be a retail entrance on the back of the building too. They just park in the back and go in the back.
Yeah, we did notice on the drive-in that there were some businesses where they had oriented both to the street and the parking lot, but they permanently closed off or substantially closed off the entrance to the sidewalk.
Mhm.
And so like in practice, those businesses only have one primary entrance. So that's something that we'd be conscious of
Mhm.
for the city center and the pedestrian mall.
Parking siting. Traditionally, form-based code does not really have a minimum parking requirement, but it does often have a maximum parking requirement. So instead of encouraging people to build as much parking as possible, you're trying to go the other way and build as much diversity and build form as you can. For you guys, that works because you have things like parking structures. If you didn't, that's a different ballgame. But for what it is now, even the way the city center master plan is set up, you have donut buildings. You've got buildings around the perimeter with parking in the middle. So you have parking that's already set aside. This is really only a big impact. Let's say if somebody had a 2-acre lot that was in this area that they didn't know what to do with, they'd be in a little bit of a hard space. Parking requirements, typically it is no parking requirement. However, we know that's a no for you guys. So we would like to see 1.5, 1 3/4 per unit. And then probably 1 per 500 for all the other spaces. And that would only include non-street parking. So anything that's off the street. Anything that's on the street, which is still a couple hundred more spots, is just icing on the cake. Because what you never want to do is program for those. Things happen, they get closed, snow fills it up, who knows?
Mhm.
What you're trying to do is minimize the negative impact of parking that it has on the pedestrian or the vehicular experience.
A big thing on this one is that the parking credits to support flexibility would be like the shared parking, the parking garages, parking lots. And so helping by sharing the parking, reducing the overall requirements because of the flexibility that offers.
And so would that be like only in parking garages, or is that also like with residential where during the day you're saying have at it, at night that's residential?
But
Well, realistically, you can split the lot, and the way it's been done lately is by coloring the different lines, like anything that's a blue line, if you go to Walmart and has a blue line in the back is employee parking.
Oh,
Anything that's the yellow, white or yellow in the front is okay for customers.
yeah.
You can do the same type of thing. Where you segregate it out that's for them, and this is only for the residents, and maybe they get 1 guaranteed spot per unit.
It just makes it more efficient, so we don't have a lot of asphalt that's sitting vacant half of the day. It's enough for all of the uses, but it's not excess for, the PM hours after an office closes.
Somebody's gonna complain about it. At some point, somebody's gonna say, well, I can't find a parking spot. If you have that busy of a time where nobody can find a parking spot in, what was it, 3,000 stalls, then you did something really right.
And we have a very successful downtown, and that's a
Correct.
good thing, and then they would just look at a lifestyle adjustment if they want to continue to
Correct.
reside in that district.
Somebody's gonna argue, but the answer is gonna be, if you really don't have a spot open in 3,000 stalls, you did great.
we pause for a minute. I'm bribing Kenny to stay here. Who else wants Jimmy John's? If you guys wanna just send me your orders, I'm just gonna do an order. You sure?
Yeah, I'm good.
Don't be a hero. You tell me your
I
stuff.
missed it. My ears were like trying to understand. I thought Kenny was running out. I was like,
He's going to unless I
Oh,
order him
no.
Jimmy John's.
Where are we ordering from?
Jimmy
Oh,
John's.
I don't think. I'm happy with that. Big John's great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, carry on.
Okay, so. Again, parking is gonna be a hot button topic, but with how much parking you guys have, and on the topic of parking structures are probably some of the things that you could potentially bond for.
The plan did have a couple of parking structures, a fire department, right? So.
And that's meant as some flexibility when and if we need to go vertical, we can. We hope we need to go vertical, it means we're doing something right. But it often will be maybe a partnership between the city and those adjacent uses or future development, so it's a win-win type of a situation.
So the developers don't generally take that cost on themselves to build that parking?
It depends on the scale.
The way Mill Creek worked is Mill Creek had to build a parking deck. And they had to build the parking structures, or at least take on the lion's share of the cost of it. And then people started being interested in that.
It's kind of a catalyst type of a thing as well.
And if you really want to build the density that is on that plan, you need to have parking involved. So, open space, this form-based code is great about requiring more open space than traditional Euclidean zoning does. It also allows for more combined or shared open spaces as opposed to just being a individual person's space. The goal is that that pedestrian mall space basically becomes the front yard of everybody that lives up above. Landscaping, it does do a fairly good job of defining where you do landscaping, what the purpose is. In this type of a climate, you don't want to do landscaping just to make it look pretty. It's got to serve a purpose. Is it sheltering? Is it hiding? Is it buffering? That's really what you're looking for. Signage, it allows for all the 7 different types of signage. So awnings, windows, wall, marquee, hanging, monument, and directional. It is going to regulate the look, form, feel, and location of said signage. The purpose behind this is basically you're creating a defined character and a placemaking element of it.
I think Alan really wanted pole signs too.
And they're just-
Internally lit twisting with like a
Yeah.
double ice cream cone on it.
That's
That's a
okay.
great one.
they're shaky.
Yeah.
The goal is to eliminate visual clutter. You don't want to have a whole bunch of signs that are haphazard. We were in Nampa last week.
You were.
I was in Nampa last week. Sorry, I've been there a couple times in the last couple of weeks. One of the discussions we had was we walked the street, they had 37 sandwich board signs in one block.
Really?
Long.
It was very wide sidewalks. It was still not too bad, but 37 was
A lot.
very distracting. Every business owner had something out and kind of like, hey, come in the shop, we're open. But it was just a little too distracting for what it was. So you don't want to do that.
I do want to clarify something on the open space, if you want to go back
Okay.
real quick. So I think there was a slight misspeak about the requirements. So it doesn't require it per se, because each individual development, the open space would be a broader community goal. So that's something that the city would take on and develop the town squares, the Pinnacle Park there. There's some smaller pocket parks that I think would be with each development. But it does regulate it when they're trying to pursue it overall. But it's not like in a typical subdivision, there may be an open space requirement. That's not the case here.
And it's about collective use more than anything.
Hmm.
So instead of having your own little yard, nobody has their own little yard.
So are we binding the city in the open space portion of it, like when we're doing the form-based code?
This is what you need binding the city.
I'm just saying, how does that work in terms of like, if we do a form-based code about the open space, then we're just setting kind of that expectation, even if it's the city that's managing that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll follow those same guidelines and any structures or elements within
Yeah.
that open space would follow
Yeah,
those
you put up
guidelines.
restrooms, it's gonna have to look and feel the same way. You wanna do light poles, they're gonna have to be the same thing. If you
All
signs,
cohesive.
you name it. Now, that being said, there is always a rebuttal process where if somebody wants to do a standout, uniquely different gazebo, that can be approved.
Mhm.
There's,
Special consideration where necessary.
and if you really want to be an arts and culture district, that's not a bad thing to have, it's like having an accent wall painted in your house.
Mhm.
A little bit
That's
is
the
fun.
eclectic nature is, you know, you don't want to have so much rigidity that there's not this haphazard,
Mhm.
you know,
Or it's sterile.
You gotta have something that's
Yeah.
not quite right for people to pay attention. Was this one yours?
I can take this one. So there are 5 really just general, regulation categories that govern, form-based code. So frontage type, well, so really the big one is form district, followed by frontage type, followed by building type, followed by design specific elements, and then use last. Next one. So for geographic parameters, those being form district and frontage type, form district in our context would be the city center and the transition zones. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about that. And frontage type, being whether it's along one of the arterials, along one of the collectors, or along a local street.
So street facing sides and how that orients the buildings.
Yeah, and so that could be, I don't know, hypothetically, the parking deck has to get screened more along the primary street rather than a local street.
Although ideally you wouldn't see it at all.
Yes, ideally, yeah, but a lot of zoning codes will make that distinction. Following those two, is building type and use. So building type, as we talked about, is the actual form that the building takes, whether it's a more commercial structure or more house-like structure. And then the use, being those general use categories or those site use categories, and the subcategories that go within each as well. Next one. And then lastly, we have our design specific elements. So as Ben talked about earlier, there's the private development areas and the public development areas. So private being landscaping, parking, signage, things that a developer would do on their own site, versus the public being street and open space design.
Now, I will say parking, depending on the structure, could be in both categories.
Yeah.
It depends on how it's structured and who owns it and who maintains it and all kinds of stuff.
Do you take this?
Sure. So project planning and form-based code, the project starts with the physical and the fiscal needs. So you're planning the physical space before you're worried about the use of the space. So once you have the physical form of the space, then you start looking at the parameters to see how you make the design fit and what that looks like. So instead of starting with things like how far away from the sides are you, how far away is, how many setbacks do you have? You start with the building and then you make all the other parameters fit to the building itself. And so it's a little different than saying, we're looking at all this other stuff. There is a hierarchy in form-based code that the form and the building comes first. That's the #1 priority. And then if that means you have a few less trees or a few less shrubs, then so be it. Those are less important on the grand scale of things. As far as the approval process, so this is kind of put together. If you have form-based code, somebody will come in and say, here's what I want. The city will do a pre-approval or a pre-application meeting. The purpose of the pre-application meeting is to sit down and talk through everything so that you can spell out all the stuff with them from the beginning. We'll wait for it to come back in. This is a little bit of a different process than you guys currently do, but the hope is it would also streamline the effort that you guys have to put into it. I think you guys do pre-development review meetings now, don't you?
Yeah.
But when you have a playbook like form-based code, you basically are turning them and saying, play by the rule. Then we don't need to nitpick you to pieces.
There's a little bit less scrutiny on use and a little bit more scrutiny on just what does it look like.
So do you, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but with the form-based code, then we would, that is accomplished through zoning still? Okay.
It's still a zone, so the property is still in zone, this zone being a form-based
So
zone.
we would create a new zone that's
The
form-based.
city center master plan will be the zone,
Correct.
or sorry, the city center zoning district.
Yeah, we talked about having a couple of different districts within this
Yeah,
center
okay.
boundary.
Mhm.
Those districts would be different classifications, but all governed by the form-based elements.
So it's, the easiest way to think of it is like having historic design guidelines. But instead of being nitpicky about, tuck point color, it's more nitpicky about how does the building interact with the site.
Well, and there was also that good graphic that was on one of the initial slides about what the difference is between use-based or use-based with design guidelines versus form-based. So use-based was that big blocky structure, and the design guidelines was that same blocky structure with some pretty elements on the exterior versus form-based is the varying forms, yeah.
Okay.
So if you do a pre-approval or pre-application meeting, then you would go into the formal project application. So the idea would be at step one, you hand them the form-based code and say, make sure your designers meet this. Typically, there's some form of a checklist involved in this where they can tell you on page X, Y, and Z that they met this, and just like you do with the general plan, you tell them where you met all the requirements, you can do the same thing here. So when they turn that in, then you have a lot less effort because you're not going through page by page, slide by slide, looking at all this stuff. You're looking for the specifics. Then you get planning review comments, and here's the beauty of it. If everything's good, it gets approved. There's not a lot of back and forth with planning commission and city council and all this other stuff. The regulating plan, once it's adopted, dictates the style, the form, and the function of this area. So you're taking a lot of onus off of everybody else in the process. Now, let's say it doesn't get approved or they want something slightly different. There's typically a design review committee and planning commission approves it, and then it goes back to step 1 or 2. But that's only if they really want to do something that is not covered in the form-based
It
code.
wasn't contemplated, but maybe a good idea, was worth considering, but
Correct.
hey, we gotta just double check, make sure it does in fact fit into what the rest of the plan calls for.
So the hope is that it should streamline that process. This one's yours.
So the city center informed district is pretty straightforward. It's really just codifying what was in the master plan. So it's a very mixed use area, small blocks, walkable, civic uses, commercial uses, residential. Has that pedestrian promenade that we've talked about. Mixed use ranging from the hospital to townhomes, high or multifamily residential, ground floor restaurant, retail, and then anywhere from 3 to 6 stories depending on the geographic area. And so that'll all be regulated in the plan as well. And so down there at the bottom again, the various uses, really the full spectrum.
And then the last one of these transition zones, and then we put this for the last slide because we want to talk about this. Realistically, you've got, as we talked earlier, 2 transition districts. You're going to have 3 districts in your form-based code. Your central core or your civic core district, and then we can call it whatever you want, but eastern transition, western transition, residential transition, commercial transition, it doesn't matter. But the goal is from here and here, you're going to transition lower and smaller. So you'll have a lower height requirement. So you'll transition 2-3 stories max. And on this side, on the west side, you would allow a little more density, a little more height, because you're really just going in between industrial Main Street and then what will be a 6-story building. So the goal is that with the 2 transition districts, you're really planning on having things be buffering between what is on the perimeter to the core. The hard part is that means you need to have 2 transition zone districts because you have 2 distinctly different neighborhoods.
Meaning, like, so the east one would be one and the west?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've got the city center core.
So this is not area number 1.
Mm-hmm,
And transition zone 1 would be like this side over here.
mm-hmm.
And then a portion of this down here because these are still fairly low in height on that side.
Mm-hmm.
And your higher density transition would be on the west side over here.
Okay.
With the purpose being, it just really, they're not the same.
They have unique characteristics of transitional elements. So
Most of that's already built out, right? That west side?
the west side, no, not necessarily.
So you actually have quite a bit of land here that
Yeah.
can still be developed. And up here,
Particularly the northwest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, yeah, we just got 4 seasons and all that, so.
but I mean, realistically, if somebody wanted to put a 4 or 5 story building in there with apartments, that's a good place to put it too. I would guarantee if you turn to your citizens and said, I know you don't want more apartments, but if you put them here, they don't show up in your neighborhood. Everybody's gonna go, sounds great, thank you very much, and not care. So that's kind of, that's the whole presentation.
Mhm.
That's form-based code, that's what it is, there's a lot here. So what we did is we made a FAQ sheet. It's 8 pages long, it's a lot of content. This is meant for people to read and kind of go through on their own.
Everything you saw in the presentation is in here, just in a more elaborate
Oh,
form.
perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then, about the 2 form districts that were on the last slides here. I know since we don't really have a lot of people to go through the feedback sheet.
Before we do that,
Okay.
we'll look at the calendar. Where we're at currently is we're doing the educational meeting. Within the next 30 to 45 days, you'll have a draft of the code. And then it'll go through initial review with the committee.
Meaning, so, sorry, draft code that you guys, thank you, you can just grab it, thanks so much. Sorry, will that code drafting and content creation, will that be after input from us, or is that?
So the way this typically works is, we were hoping to get a little feedback tonight. So what we can do is, if there's any way we can get some feedback, we would like to incorporate it, but we can also do that after the generic outline and high level content is ready.
Also,
As a reminder, the city center master plan has quite a bit of design elements that were put in there, so we know which direction we wanna go. from a
Right.
design perspective.
Yeah.
We just gotta put it on the paper and draft a code that takes that vision and the plan and puts it into textual
Yeah.
codification.
The stuff from the plan was really about size, materiality, and now we gotta talk more about transparency. How many windows are on a floor? How much area is window space? How much is whatever it is?
Probably the one thing that scares me the most about this is that, if you get the right developer in, they'll naturally just follow or have a desire. It's going to be very high quality development costs. You probably follow a lot of these design standards that are already in picture format, not in codified format at this point. The thing that worries me is if it's multiple developers, we'll get what we've gotten in the past where we have to literally spell out everything that we want and they will build to the base of whatever that is.
Yeah, the
Going
lowest.
in.
And that's the purpose of form-based code is this is the base. That's,
Yeah.
but the base is also what you have in the city center master.
Yeah.
This is what is expected.
But if you want to go above and do granite and special Abbey brick, then go for it.
Mhm.
If you don't want to, well, you can just do what you want.
for feedback, and we can get feedback from y'all tonight, on these pages as we go through them. But also, Scott, if you wanna provide everybody with the PDF, and they can just use text form on, Adobe.
How about we just leave the prints here and they can just fill them out and scan
That's
them.
a good idea.
And,
You guys have meetings coming up, feel free to share them and they can write on them, give us content, give us feedback. But we'll run through them with you, that way you guys kind of have an idea of what we're asking, you know. But we know there's developers chomping at the bit, so we kind of want to get this moving along, and the adoption or the codification process is not short. So.
That's where most of the time will be spent is in the,
Yeah,
is it kind of 4 and 5?
4, 5, and 6. And that's a very aggressive 4, 5, and 6, I'm not gonna lie, it's
Okay.
probably gonna be August.
Okay.
It's just the way,
So,
I know,
okay.
I put them both in July, it's probably gonna be August before that's done.
Since me and Penny are the only elected officials here, we're gonna put some special little Easter eggs in, like all streets must have L or K names.
Rooster.
Everyone must, yes, sure, Alan.
Roosters per square footage.
Everyone must, any restaurants must serve Dr. Pepper.
That would go over really well.
Okay, so yeah, take us through, and I think at least Penny and I can provide, and obviously Alan and Scott.
So the first page here is pretty straightforward. I mean, I think this is probably gonna be the least, contentious of them all,
Okay.
because we've been over this a lot.
Mhm.
It's
So-
straight out of the master plan.
Yeah.
So in terms of any of the uses that you see there, near the middle of the top, are there any things that you'd like to emphasize, take out, add?
And they can write directly on it, you guys can scan as copies and use back. It's,
Mhm.
but everything has a box with questions they can answer. That was the purpose, was sometimes people don't want to stand up and speak, so if they have the opportunity to write on it and give us feedback, that's great.
So here's my question, so as we have this form-based code, like, is there anything, and this may be a dumb question, but is there anything to prevent someone from coming in and just putting in straight, residential? Cause we're saying here are your allowed uses, but what protection do we have against like someone saying, oh, we're just gonna cram as many houses as possible?
So the
I was
protection,
wondering the same.
the protection you have is in there, we can talk about mixtures and users and types of uses.
Can you put any sort of like minimum commercial percentage or something like that?
We likely can, but we have to be very careful about how we tie it back. So as long as we stay in commercial, civic, broad categories, that's fine. We can't sit there and say you must have 40% restaurants.
Okay.
Also, what we can do is, going back to the form districts and frontage types, we can regulate those building types, and then within those building types, we can regulate the uses. And so in a lot of these building types, we can say, no ground floor residential,
Oh, okay.
things of that nature.
Which will cut out a lot of the,
Essentially, nothing can be built until they're ready to put a ground floor retail.
Commercial.
There's, you know,
And as much as you can put in, I love the description, it's very clear in my mind, I'm just wondering if someone comes in and they're pushing really hard. Obviously along the chicane, the design that you guys have there is like a 2 and 3 story type commercial element. Feels like you're walking down a main street, and that was
that's the desire.
I wonder if we can get more specificity on that, as to exactly what it would be, but then when you get outside of that, it says minimum height 3 stories. It would actually be nice if we put on the east side, the minimum is 3 stories, and then if you went on the west side, it's your minimum.
So that's where you
4
get the
stories.
character district.
Yeah,
Because then it may be transition, which would be shorter,
yeah,
or it may be the commercial core, which may be taller.
yes.
So that's where those districts play into that. And the chicane, the best way you can deal with this is you take a lead that they can't build in that easement. And you legitimately can say it's for utilities, because that's the utility corridor going down the site.
That would be good on the west side of the district, though, to be more specific in that, it says 3 story there, but the worst thing that could ever happen is having 3-story
stories.
apartments on the west side of this entire area, where we don't get the density needed, where we don't get the unique architecture needed for the city to succeed.
Are you suggesting, Alan, we take the city center form district and divide it?
I don't know if that would be feasible, but I would,
We can, and we could look at it and say areas that were 2 stories tall, we don't have to, 2 stories tall or 3 stories tall, that's a low walkable district. And other areas are urban form district. I don't care what the terminology is.
that's what I'm hinting at, because I know in the past development, again, none of this is necessary if we work with a developer that wants to shoot for the moon on all these things. I'm just thinking if there is a developer that wants to take a stab at something on this line, and they muster up enough funds and they come in and they build to the minimum possible, that's the only thing that worries me. Because it kind of just, it hurts themselves.
It's the cash value.
They'll
Sorry.
shoot themselves in the foot because it's not financially viable if they do that.
Correct. If you guys are okay with it, we can split this up into more districts. That's not the issue. We just don't want to have extra levels of review.
Mhm.
So maybe we do one that's like,
You could chop it into 2 or 3
Yeah,
across
we
if
could
you go
do
from east
2.
to west.
We could say, so let's say if this is the, I don't know, the west side, transition district, then we could say within, what is that, 3,000 feet, so within 1,500 feet of the west side transition district, then you have to have a minimum of 4 stories, or something of that nature.
and we'll look at it and see if there's an area that makes sense to carve out. The hard part is in order to carve that out, it's just that little narrow strip, because you have development with the the assisted living and the townhomes that are already there.
Yes,
So that it just is a weird little.
they could
strip of
legal
land.
non-conforming though, which would be
Yeah.
fine.
But we'll look at that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wouldn't want to go more than like 4 or 5 districts here, because it's not a big area.
Yeah, it'll get way
We
too
don't wanna
specific
chop
at that
up
point,
too
and
much.
then we won't be able to actually.
Because, and realistically, this whole southern 40 is all one district.
Yeah.
That's just the way that goes.
Because of ownership, yeah.
Transition districts, we talked about these already. This is where they can talk to us about heights, 2 to 3 stories, where that would go, what that looks like. Please stress here that on the eastern side, you're not going more than 3 stories tall. There are not apartments against it, there are not townhomes against it, there's small lots, single family houses.
I actually think right along the canal, that's the only provision that you have to have to keep in
Correct.
accordance with a previous city center study and what was expected by the residents there. But
And-
once you get beyond that single line along the canal, then my understanding is you could go to the
You could go to 2 and 3
story.
story.
Yeah.
And what we can do is we can write in there specifically on that one that says, within 200 linear feet of the eastern border of the transitional district, you must have no more than 14 feet in height. And, whatever,
If you flip 2 more pages, we actually talk about this a little bit more. We'll get more into about what that might look like. But we can go back to the.
I was looking for that, man. Building uses. So we want people to understand upper floor and lower floor. Ground floor, and this is where we have it. We could even say in the transitional core area that's taller, the first floor and second floor are non-residential. So you have office, retail, office, restaurant, whatever, you
And
name
is
it.
that for both transition districts, or are we just talking about the western?
So just the western,
Okay.
and we can be very specific about that. The goal is, we know better than put anything non-residential in the eastern.
Yeah.
That's, quite frankly, we know how that's gonna play out. It's gonna be townhomes right along the road. It's gonna be small, single-family homes on the eastern side.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still gonna get people knocking on the door here angry about something. So,
I get like the ground floor versus upper floor goes back to the building types, what would not be allowed.
Mm-hmm.
the next one is the transition district building type. This is the map I was looking for. So we could realistically, Alan, carve out the west of the chicane. And then we could realistically carve out the eastern side of the chicane as well.
Just split the whole district down the middle? is that
Split
what
the
you mean?
district down the middle.
Yeah.
Because realistically, 1 to 2 stories, what we're not saying is how tall a story is.
Mm.
So
What we do. Okay, we got that.
we don't have to though.
Sure.
So
You
that,
want a minimum on the ground floor.
correct, but if somebody wants to come in and build a 2-story outpatient facility that has 24-foot ceilings in each floor, that's fine.
Anything that gets you closer to what your current designs are representing, I think the better, while still providing some flexibility. I think that's gonna be key.
Yes.
Because if you leave it wide open, again, it can go down really fast with somebody.
Yeah. So we'll use language, to Ben's point about, tapering from the chicane.
Yeah.
I mean, using 1,000 feet makes, Scotch shot a little more difficult, to not have to go measure that, so, the chicane would be a lot more like geographically clear.
The only thing that we would have to do with that though is we would have to have language that says it splits along the center line of a utility. Or we'd have to have some kind of a boundary that splits that district. And that's something that council's gonna have to take action on to give us that boundary. I hate to say that, but it's just, we have to have boundary to define it.
Mm-hmm.
We might have to get a little bit more specific and actually describe the center line of the chicane with a survey level accurate legal description.
375 feet at 274 degrees and then turn X, Y, and Z, which can be done, but I mean, that's gotta essentially, the next steps in this process after form-based code are the master developer agreement and then getting your easements, because that easement is gonna define where these roads cross, where all that transition happens is you have to preserve that chicane as it goes through, and only the municipality really has the authority to preserve that easement. It's gonna be unpopular, but
While we're still on this page, I want to talk about the concept of a transition height plan. And I think this is a really effective legal tool for protecting the single family home neighborhoods on the east side. And so from their property line or from the canal, saying that the transition height plane starts at 35 feet off the ground. And for the next 150 feet goes up at a 45-degree angle. And so once they get beyond that 150 feet, they can go up to whatever the rest of the district allows. But within that 150-foot zone, they can only be within that overall protection. So that is tapering down.
So that's really important on the eastern side. The western side, not quite as much, but it's still important.
It's important, but like you mentioned earlier on, if you go higher in this western transition zone, you won't have any complaints. You'll have a few on the north portion of that, but that's always been anticipated that would be a little bit higher.
And I mean,
Northwest.
you've already got what you've got there. It's not like you're breaking the mold. I will be honest, though, I think with the amount of housing that's in this core area, you're gonna be busy and you're gonna have a lot of apartments. I know it's not what some people want to hear, but that's just, I'm not saying they're all for sale apartments. They could be called condos that are, and be actually purchased, that's okay. But if you guys are okay with it, I would say transitional height plan on the east side is important. And I think that would go a long way to keeping people at ease as we go through this process. And would give them the parameters to say, does this design meet the transitional height plan that we all agreed upon? So we can say it's 150 feet, and then it goes X, Y, and Z. Correct. Parking. Parking is fairly well defined with the city center. You have donut buildings, as they should. People drive inside. The one thing I would add on this one is we would love to add a comment in here that you require dual entry dual entry retail food. So you're not walking around the back. What it does is it allows you to not have as many pedestrian walkways, and you can have masses of buildings, which developers prefer to build. But people still have the ability to walk through to get to something. Maybe there's little porticos and there's a little arcade with little shops that go down the sides, but it's not, they don't have to walk out and all the way around to get to where
It's
they're.
almost an absolute necessity. If you
Yes.
don't have that, then people are gonna feel like they get into this donut and then they're trapped and they've gotta walk around and get disoriented. It's just, you
Even
can't do
in other
that.
city center areas that you're describing where they do have either gaps or hallways
Did you
that
ever go
go
to the
down.
arcade in Cleveland?
Mm-hmm.
They have one that was built in the late 1860s, and it's 3 stories, and each one step back, but in the early 1900s, they put a glass dome over it. But it's just retail and residential, and it literally just passed from one side of the building to the other. They cut a hole through it and opened up more small retail facilities. So it's a great way to get daylight going through. It is kind of a little wind tunnel, but at the same time, it also serves a purpose to get people from A to B without going through the JCPenney store and walk into the mall.
I have been in this,
Yeah.
now that you describe it.
I know you're describing a lot of other city centers across you to the older city centers. You used to see that a lot more prevalent. And then you also see it in very old businesses, but they were specific to the individual business, like Bluebird. Where
Yes,
you can either come from the west side or you can come in from the east side. That's not the exact same thing, but there are other businesses that I've been to, like Ogden and other areas where you can walk through and you have access to your businesses. You can park.
they're great spaces and developers like them because you get higher rental rates on like a 1,200 square foot retail spot. Somebody's not renting 5,000 square feet, but it's not $22 a foot, it's $40 a foot.
I saw a lot of professional offices do that too, and they were on the frontage. They were in one of the internal or interior.
So like Edward
offices.
Jones goes in those places.
Yeah, Edward Jones, I saw a lawyer, there was a lawyer that owned one down here. as well.
Typically, and that's the way of skirting around retail first floor, because technically, we're talking about building facing and building use, or building type, right? That little pedestrian mall that cuts through there, that little walkway, we're not as worried about in form-based code. So it's a way to squeak everything in there, but still not make everybody angry.
So if the dual entry, do we need to write that as, because it sounds like we have
It's
to
a
do it.
requirement, but
Okay.
again, it's something we talked about early on, but it's, I mean, from our end as well, it's, It is what it
That
is.
was my vision as well, so I just wanna make sure you guys know that.
We're
I don't
good.
need to
It's, we were gonna do it anyways, and we were just telling you.
Okay.
There will be like, make sure it's they're operational, so that we don't have cases where they close off.
Mhm.
Pedestrian space zones, this talks more about green space and pedestrian improvements. This is where, I know you guys are gonna laugh at this, we saw the bill of what Mill Creek paid for some of their trees.
Crazy.
I had my job,
Oh,
They go dig out like 20-year-old.
mature ones,
like $150 church.
what?
Really?
Really?
From where?
Somewhere in Utah County. The major tree in the site was $180,000.
Wow.
Because they had to have
Who
special
pays for that?
oversized. They had to have special oversized permits of trucks to get them, like the roof all, the whole thing, you're going.
Anything over $16,000, all the survivability are like 1 in 100 when you
Yeah.
get to that size.
They don't die, like you're digging up the whole roof ball.
Oh,
And but if you buy these itty bitty Twinkie things, they all die. So, you gotta find a happy medium.
Has that been working out for them? Like, did they survive?
Fine, it's fine.
What's funny is you still go in there and it seems like you're just under a microscope because it's so
It's big.
exposed to the sun too.
Mm.
Well,
And-
it's big.
That's where your design's a little different. It's not meant to be a big plaza, it's a walkway.
Yeah.
well, on this real quick,
Yeah.
$108,000 trees.
when we talked about open space earlier, like there weren't requirements necessarily, but I think a good opportunity in these, build to zone pedestrian spaces
Mhm.
is the opportunity for pocket parks. And so we can program, some of these articulation areas, for benches and other activations. So not necessarily, a huge public space that the city would manage, but just some small amenities there.
So when you say pocket park, are you talking about like possibly a strip of grass with a bench on it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Or maybe not even grass, could just be a
Just
place for
like
rest.
Gravel.
But I'm just saying, like, pocket park to me sometimes means, in my mind, that's a bigger thing. So I just want to make
Yeah,
sure.
parking parks are all the way down to something as small as a half a parking spot.
Maybe
Yeah.
where someone just steps off the sidewalk to sit for a minute.
So another way to say it is a non-walk surface.
Okay.
So when you design the pedestrian corridors, you've got your circulation patterns, and then you've got those tree lawns that typically have your garbage cans, your benches, your bike racks, all that stuff. That's your non-walk surface.
Got it.
And maybe it's 3 foot, maybe it's 6 foot. It's gonna change entirely, but the goal is, if you don't want people standing and blocking circulation, but you also want them to feel like they can pull aside and have an intimate conversation with somebody they just met on the street.
Mhm.
It also helps you to break up the facade, so it's not just
Yeah.
a straight wall right up to the sidewalk and there's no variation in that architecture. It's helpful when you do have the variation, now you have a space that you could activate or use, and that's where these come into play.
One thing we would like feedback on, I see the, note that I left for us here, is that these could also be used for like outdoor dining. So I wanted to just know like what y'all's thoughts are, as well as everybody else who fills these out at a later time. On like, outdoor dining, gathering spaces are, suggested entrance plazas. So like what the different visions are for these, and then we can kind of incorporate it from there.
So but those are kind of complementary uses, right? Like, are we needing to decide this, what would you like to see in the BTZ zoning, pedestrian space?
They're just potential uses,
Okay.
suggestions, and ideas.
And there are no specific answers. We're just looking for ideas at this point.
Really just wanna make sure that it's a very vibrant area, and these little spaces create those little opportunities for vibrancy. If a shop owner wants to put a rack out of something that they have on sale or something that's seasonal, and they're saying, hey, it's summer, check out our swimming suit selection or whatever. We have a spot where they could do that, or a
That would be
cafe.
the best sale ever. Put in a splash pad and have a swimsuit store.
So it's just opportunities to make sure we don't have just a militaristic, barracks type of a facade and frontage. We want more than just a sidewalk down a front pathway.
Yeah, I'd say on the side of benches, like, just
Other
the
people
seating.
watching, lots of
Yeah.
opportunities.
And you can take your food there if you want. Yeah.
Which kind of, Scott, leads into the segue of transparency, which is the next sheet. This is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of your design. Other than materiality, is how much window and transparent spaces are open in the area. The key to the New England style is lots of retail windows and big upper story windows as well.
Mhm. I
It's
love
not
that.
your standard 32 by 65 window. It's 32 by 105. They're
Mhm.
big windows. And you should have a minimum of 60-70% transparency on the first floor.
At least, because it allows for people to see as they're walking down, like, what is in that space? Oh, it's an attorney's office, oh, it's a real estate office, and maybe they put some of those things on their windows, like you see when you walk down, Park City, the main street, or if it's a boutique, you can see, oh, they've got cool stuff in there.
But the transparency really is important. This is done in two ways, measuring the transparency of the wall and then measuring how much blank wall is allowed. The purpose behind them is retail space is really measured in transparency. Upper floors are measured in blank wall space.
Mhm.
So the blank wall space is going to do more about determining the distance between your windows. So you could have really big windows, but only have two of them in a 30-foot stretch, which doesn't work.
Mhm.
So that the limitation is gonna set, you can only have 20% of that area that's brick. So the whole purpose is basically have nothing but windows and brick columns that are supporting that thing up. That's what you're aiming for.
And I really feel like this, because this takes a lot of maybe design acumen from folks providing feedback. I think we would defer to the New England style that is defined in
agree.
the plan to say, what does that style call for? And then just write it.
And then reverse engineer it kind of,
Yeah.
because I don't think I'm qualified at all to tell you guys that, but you tell us what we need to do to get to that point is what I would say.
They tried to do that beforehand and they kind of, I hate to say this, but the desire even 15 years ago and 10 years ago, when they did this, was a New England style. And
Wow.
they kind of failed because all they said was we would like New England style. They didn't even get to that point, but that was always intended like a brick or a timeless type aspect. And so, yeah, with this, it would be good to reverse engineer that to say, well, looking at these photos that you have provided, how do you describe that? And say, we really need these elements.
So your highest should probably be 35-40% brick. Everything else should be either the gable roof that comes down and dormers or extra large windows or stuff like that.
So are both these the New England style,
These are just generic form-based code graphics.
Just to show us what.
Just to show you what it will, they'll get corrected for your specific style. But until we get to that point, we don't really have a graphic to show you.
Okay.
Other than the one in the master plan that showed those, it was 4 commercial buildings with upper story. Those are, I think, our closest in plan example so far. But I think this is definitely a reverse engineer type of an exercise.
Agreed. And that's it. Those are your areas that the form-based code is gonna cover. I know somebody's gonna say, well, what about land use? Just politely remind them that this is measuring and documenting form before you document use.
And that's where, as the mayor mentioned, that's where I was getting wrapped around was like, so if we're focused on the form more than the use, could someone not still build a bunch of residential that follows the form?
So you can, but the form is gonna say you must have 2 or 3 floors of
And
commercial.
no ground. floor
No
residential.
ground floor residential.
And it's not to say you can't bake in limiting uses. You can say, look, in this entire district, we won't have a tenant or a space dedicated to a payday lender or a pawn shop or whatever you want to say, hey, no thanks, it's a big area.
Other than it's about too, like this kind of like character level stuff, at least in that corridor where the chicane, like that kind of high density commercial, what we're picturing.
Yeah.
You kind of want to say, look, not right here.
For example, if somebody were to come to us on Main Street on a vacant parcel, they would say, hey, I want to build a bank. We'd say permitted land use. Go ahead and submit your building permit and we'll review the site plan. But we're not starting on the building that they're wanting to build first. They're not saying, hey, we want to build a 1-story with a drive-through with, a nice big
Right.
facade sign and, oh, by the way, there's gonna be a bank in here. That's kind of what form-based is doing, is start by telling us the building you want to build and then we'll backwards.
Realistically, I mean, there are ways to go about this and say, look, you have to have a certain amount of coverage. And instead of limiting the coverage, you're setting a minimum lot coverage, saying the building must cover 50% of the lot, 75% of the lot. Instead of saying you can only cover 25% of the lot maximum, you're flipping that the other way around.
So to your question about building only residential, so the geographic parameters, form district and frontage type. So I think one thing that'll very likely be an outcome of this is the form district will be city center and the frontage type may be the chicane. Along in that geographic constraint area, the building types that are allowed would probably be, let's get to it. Well, let's just say it would be building types that would not allow ground floor residential.
Okay.
There would be protections,
That intersect to protect us from what we're trying to avoid.
correct.
And there's very few buildings, if you look at the master plan, there's very few buildings that have a first floor that is not, or that allows for residential. So I don't think that we're gonna have
The ones that do are really along Wolfpack Way,
yeah.
which is, I mean, from our end, I'm not as stressed over it because they're already matching what's on the other side of Wolfpack Way.
I think one thing that would be good to get feedback on is along some of these critical arterials, namely the chicane. Is do we want, so retail and restaurant has been clearly identified as a desire for that area. But let's say, do we want to prevent office space on the ground floor? Or prevent certain use types like vape shops and put geographic constraints like there shall be no vape shops at all, or 1 per 150 feet. Those types of things we can write into there as protections as well to make sure that we're not getting an over proliferation of a certain type that may detract from the overall city center.
That's fantastic, because just thinking out loud right now, as you go through even North Logan City, several other cities have kind of mocked us for certain things that we've allowed as if they couldn't just go into those other cities as well. But I think we need to go about this, and that's the thing that always scares me, is in my mind, it's common sense that it would be more retail because of that frontage and everything else. And you think they'd naturally just want to be there. But we will want to be pretty specific as to how much we want to see of each of those land use types. And I'll just say flat out, absolutely anything that's quasi even adult oriented businesses, the vape shops, everything else, smoke shops, anything along there, you flat out eliminate from this area, because there are other areas in the city where they are permissible.
Okay.
But they don't really add to the area. They don't add to the collection where you're coming and you want to get something to eat and sit and relax and enjoy the open areas around this area. That they don't add to that.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would potentially push back on is an arts and culture district is gonna need alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think
We-
these things like liquor
Just not a
stores,
liquor
like,
store.
yeah.
Yes, I would just say not
Yeah.
your.
You're not getting another one,
We're
Logan.
not gonna get a state, sanctioned liquor store.
I think that's-
So like a restaurant that serves alcohol is very different from a liquor store, you got bar alone.
I just,
And we haven't restricted those in the past. The ones that, like, what's ironic is, this is just bringing up the alcohol discussion. In the past in North Logan, it's been humorous to me that there's strict limitations on off premise.
Mhm.
Like, the ability to buy alcohol, take it off premise and then drink it somewhere else. So like in grocery stores and everything else, there's only a few licenses like that. However, there's been no restrictions on certain types of restaurants that serve certain types of alcohol to a certain limit, like until you get to the bar level, and then it does have a little bit of a restriction. The thing that I don't get in that whole argument, and it comes down from the state, is wouldn't you rather have regulation of the alcohol sales right there from like a bartender or the restaurant, rather than someone taking it, or sorry, and restricting how much alcohol is consumed, rather than someone taking it, or sorry, someone taking it home? There isn't the risk of them driving while drunk. And that's just a personal theory of mine, but I laughed when they had this debate in city council, because I was like, why wouldn't you just let them take it home, drink it there? Because then they're not driving with it.
Well, what's always baffled me is when they're, and I know why cities do this, that cities will put owners requirements, parking requirement on bars, which is kind of antithetical, because you don't want people drinking.
Don't drink in your car.
But they put these owners requirements on there to prevent bars from being there in the first place, but it's funny.
Yeah, I think you're just gonna have a lot of restaurants that serve a certain level of alcohol,
yeah,
and
beer and wine.
Yeah, and we just have to be very specific about what types are allowed in there.
And I think,
Cocktails, so this is something, if you had a high-end restaurant, you would expect there to be a cocktail menu. And that's, I feel like that fits this area where we wanna have some nice sit-down eateries.
Yeah.
For
Well,
sure.
the interesting thing is some of the Salt Lake restaurants have found a way around the cocktail license. They serve pre-made cocktails, which falls under a beer and wine license.
Like a
Which-
mule in a can
Yeah.
versus a mixed drink.
And I went, oh, that kind of makes sense. I think the best way to go about those non-desire or those less than desirable is say, look, you can be on peripheries, you can be on bisecting streets, you can't be on the chicane. That's,
Yeah, my initial thought is on all the bisecting streets, the east-west streets that cross through, that's good frontage for office. But on the chicane, boutique, window shopping, food and beverage, and those are, I think, what we would wanna have the most, cause it has the most interaction and the most,
and we can write that in a way that says, not, office on first floor is not allowed within 150 feet of this boundary.
Or
Yeah.
actually on the second story.
Correct.
Like you described.
Fully allowed on second stories anywhere.
Now, it's also interesting as this thing kicks off and as perhaps as it phases out, we can adjust this over time, but we don't wanna have a vacant bottom floor. And so there may be a period where we say for the first 5 years, we may allow for an office space, just so we don't have vacancy. But we can adjust. It just depends on the speed and the phasing of it all, but
And I'm less worried about some offices over others. Like if you go to Cedar City, there's an insurance company there. What is it? I forget the name, but they own 8 buildings in 8 Main Street buildings. They're all offices with covered up windows.
Well, and that we can protect against. We can say in the transparency section,
Correct.
we can put protections in there about not allowing them to cover up their windows. So.
There are
if you have
some
offices
cities that have
that-
done it well where the offices are actually on the first floor, but the first 30 foot of the building is just a little coffee shop.
Mhm.
So it looks and acts like a restaurant retail, but it actually is office. So,
yeah, I think that there's just the desire to protect that chicane for that purpose.
Mhm.
We just wanna have good window shopping and walkable retail. There will probably be some ebbing and flowing as we get this thing kicked off and we phase it out, through full development, but
you get the right developer, they're gonna bring in the people. Somebody of this scale of development knows who to call at Starbucks and knows who to call at Chick-fil-A and knows who to call at. They're gonna know everybody and that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, so Ben, did you say developers are chomping at the bit to get going on this? Is that what
I don't think developers chomping at the bit. We have to get the land ready first.
it's not turnkey yet. We've gotta get the property owners in agreement, to.
That's what I thought. I must have misheard then, because I thought you said something about getting this process adopted quickly.
So that, but it's not for this 40-acre parcel, it's for the periphery, the
Oh,
transition
okay.
zones.
I think there may have been some discussion, we were talking about timeline, or may, not actually, it was here before you
Yeah.
got here. But once they take out the loan, they're gonna wanna get it moving as soon as possible.
Once everything is alignment and there's a developer on the hook, as soon as they break ground, they're gonna say, hey, we want this thing done as quick as possible so we can get tenants, paying rents and.
So like, is IHC, willing to play ball with their ownership of?
So far.
We've had a couple conversations and we have, future conversations planned, so the ball is rolling. There's gonna be some of those, discussions behind the scenes that are somewhat tedious, trying to understand everybody's needs and wants.
It's gonna hit the fan at some point. I think the question is gonna be about. But to your question, yes, there was a comment about developers that are interested, but it's not in the core blocks.
Yeah,
It's in the transition zones that they're waiting for this to all be done. So they can build their smaller scale developments that are happening in the transition districts.
Go ahead, Kenny.
well, I was just to finish, like you talked about, first floor along the chicane being, window shopping type areas, and how do we make that economically viable? Like downtown Logan's supposed to be that way too, and there's just a bunch of empty buildings.
It's a very different scenario when downtown Logan is on this highway. And it's just parking is not great. It's not. If you look in the distance, the walkable distance to get to Main Street, the amount of actual dwelling units within that. This is called Center Street, is very little. There's not a lot of folks within that walking around. It's a very different animal altogether.
There's two other things though. Logan does not have that you would have. That's a actually viable town square with a green space right in the middle, which is the primary draw for school-age kids, young families, whatever you want to call it, all season long. And the other one would be a theater that is immediately adjacent to the central component there. Those are the two things that are going to draw people in. And whether they park on the north or the south, they have to walk through a portion of it to get to that facility.
And the magic of a master planned type of a development is all of these things are working in concert together, where if they were to stand by themselves, they probably wouldn't be successful. Because they're all, planned to be supporting uses and to draw people in for other, for a show at the theater, or perhaps a doctor's appointment at a medical facility. And then they happen to be there, it's like, oh, grab lunch, or there's a shop down here, I wanted to look and see if they had something, or grab a snack at a boutique or whatever. So it's highly coordinated to be mutually beneficial.
One thing I will say is Utahns love to shop.
Yeah, you're not our target audience.
I'm sorry. I know that.
Whatever you say, where there's a spending, is that right?
Well, we gonna bring up this completely off topic, but one thing we may wanna do with this, because this is so well put together and this is so clear. This is going to be something that comes up pretty often, unrelated to form-based code, quasi. Is the ownership question that keeps coming up, that we hear so often when we come back from the Utah League of Cities and Towns Conference. May or may be able to help out with this, but it might be good if we send this plan to the Utah League of Cities and Towns and just ask them and just said, what are some of the incentives and funding opportunities and things regarding ownership that they're working on right now that could be prevalent or could work with this area, because they're talking about the first-time home buyer. I don't know if that's applicable to condominiums, but they're also working through the issues with condominiums that they've had in the past, which has been insurance liability, those types of
Developers hate
questions.
building it, architects hate designing it because of the liability.
Exactly, and so they're working through some things at the state
Nick
level.
Jarvis is pretty good at it.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to. They're really great.
I
You
think
just tell me when.
You're welcome to ship it out anytime. And just say, look, we know the city's got to be the catalyst of this project, so what mechanisms does the state have? And what we can do on our end is start looking at some of the other ones, like, are you eligible for, I don't think you're eligible for USDA.
We're not here.
I don't think so.
Not rural, yeah.
But I think if you go to Hyde Park, technically you're eligible.
Mhm.
Do you get a raise grant, a build grant, whatever that's called now? Do you look at some of the other stuff? We can start looking at some of those pieces.
Yeah, and you brought up several funding opportunities in some of our previous meetings, but I just think that instead of us having to do all the homework on that, I think this is something that fits into what the state is really pushing as far as handling the housing concerns, but also pushing ownership at the same level. And how do we use this as a catalyst to say, hey, state, if you really want to push condominiumization of all these areas, how can you enable and help this move along?
The one thing that we really can't do with form-based code though, is dictate owner versus renter.
It's home first, that's right, but we
Yeah.
can be a development agreement and
Correct.
other mechanisms for sure.
Correct.
The code itself doesn't focus on ownership per se.
And that's,
I know it's
we
way
can't
off
really-
topic with that, so thanks. for
yeah,
clarifying
we
that.
can't really dictate owner versus renter with the form-based code. That's, to Scott's point, it's when a developer comes in and says, look, I'm looking for these concessions, because they all do. The answer is great, you have to make X, Y, and Z available for percent for purchase, percent for lease. That's the way it is.
And usually they'll do one or the other because of management structures. It's just difficult to operate both an HOA and of an apartment company run it. But yeah, I mean, anything, that's great that the state's trying to do that. It's so hard to build condos.
there's a reason why it's a rare product type, but, I think the state is trying to cross some of those bridges and alleviate some of those concerns. I really do, I mean, personally, I owned a condo, it was my first piece of real estate out of school, and it was the only reason why I was able to get out of student loan debt and move up in the housing market. And it's a fantastic vehicle for first-time buyers, so I think the state recognizes that, we want that ownership, that pride in ownership, and that individual living and residing in our city, being engaged in the community.
We recognize it won't be 100%, but the other positive aspect that comes out of it, and this is just the common thing that everyone uses, is stereotypical description of why you want owner occupied. It's because they become part of the community in a more realistic sense. Not that you can't if you rent. If you rent, you can easily become part of the community. It's just the likelihood of that lessens with rental because of the duration of them living there. With an owner occupied, you're looking at 4, 5, 10 years. Whereas rental, you're looking at 1 to 3, 4 years. In that home.
So what we'll do is we'll pack all these up and we'll leave them with you. You're welcome to distribute them as you need them. Other than that, we're gonna start drafting, and our goal is to have a nice outline and some graphics that are more specific to this style of New England style for you in the next 30 to 45 days.
So great.
I'm gonna call it a 75% of the way set. It's not gonna be done, but it'll be enough for people to sit there and say, I agree, or, oh, no, I don't like it.
As for feedback on these, do we want to aim for a week from today?
I'll leave it, when is the next council meeting?
Let's make that.
On the 14th.
Let's touch base and we'll see what might be reasonable.
We can push forward with the outline and some of the other stuff.
Yeah,
in
we
the
can,
interim.
the city center for sure. I was thinking more so for the transition.
And it's, this whole, everything that's this feedback, every sheet says transition district, because we had a pretty good idea what the whole was gonna be. But the transition district is where we got kind of funky, because do we really want to continue the New England feel going east into the residential neighborhood?
No question.
That's, or do you want to go, is it a hybrid of the two?
For gravel, you just need to get on the front edge and then you lessen that requirement. as you
You can go back to just the minimal design standards at that point.
Correct, but that's why these were all transition districts, but we have to figure out what that looks like.
Okay, well, we'll wrap this up, for the folks who are listening online or to the recording, but there will be more to come. Again, it's just a work session for educational purposes, there'll be more public input and formal discussion on the draft as it comes together. Okay.
Yep.
Hopefully the adjourn or how.
I mean.
Ready to go?
So-